Welcome back to the Forensics Detailing channel. Today we're doing a video titled The Botox Effect, which is going to be delving into the area of buffer trowels and holograms on your paintwork.
Guess that I am wrong or how we're closer now. I've been making my amends. Come and see. Where have you been off to now? Wait for me, dear beloved, lend me light as I wander off into the night, or I won't be found.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. Good to see you. Today, hopefully, we're going to be doing an interesting and useful video. Should be some useful information on this. I hope it gets a good discussion going. And it's around heat and buffer trowels and holograms. Now, I've titled the video The Botox Effect, and that's inspired by an article that Ivan LaCroix from Optimum Polymer Technologies wrote. So the first thing I want to do is read you this article, and it's a paraphrased version of the article, and it's kind of picking out the bits, the important bits, because it would be quite long to go through it all. So just bear with me as I turn around and read this out. You know, this is not some fancy production. So, one technical issue not often discussed in polishing is heat. Back when we were polishing lacquer, heat was seen as beneficial to the polishing process. Today's paint is in essence plastic, and heat is your enemy in many ways. Paint manufacturers agree that 140 to 150 Fahrenheit is the upper heat limit that should be induced from polishing and compounding. So that's a very important statement, very important, 140 to 150 degrees. Another way of looking at it is that the maximum temperature differential of 80 degrees Fahrenheit should not be exceeded, okay? So if your paintwork's running at 60 when you take the heat measurement, you shouldn't add more than 80 to it. If it's at 40, you shouldn't add more than 80 to it. So depending on the temperature of the panel, you shouldn't raise it by 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can use either one of those benchmarks, overall temp of 140 to 50, or not adding 80 degrees Fahrenheit. This induced heat is unlike that generated by the effects of the sun, a paint booth, or the radiant heat from the engine compartment. Heat induced by polishing is very targeted and escalates rapidly. This puts stress on the paint that it is not equipped to deal with. So that's very important as well. So what they're saying there, a panel can still get up to very high temperatures out in sunlight or when it's being baked, and the clear coat can stand that because it's a slower process. But when you're machine polishing and you raise the temperature of a tiny area, or effectively a very small area, very rapidly, that is when you are going to do the damage. So when polishing and raising the heat. 4 user-controlled actions affect heat operation the most, okay, the most. There are more, of course, that affect heat. Pressure, tool speed, you know, the speed that is the pad's rotating. Arm speed, so the speed that you're moving the pad, okay, that's quite obvious because that's going to affect all the distances and how quickly you move the abrasives over any particular one part of the surface. And pad maintenance and pad choice, so the type of pad you're using as well. You could add to those 4, I think another very important one will be the type of abrasive you're using. You know, that will play a big part in it. You know, obviously if you're using a very aggressive cutting compound compared to a finishing compound, that's going to play a big factor. Probably the type of clear coat as well, the hardness of that clear coat, the quality of that clear coat. But yeah, I've been saying the 4, there's probably 1,000,001 other things that affect it to smaller levels, but the 4 that are picked up here are the important ones. Heating the paint, and I'm using the term paint, but in this context he's talking about clear coat, okay? So we're talking about clear coat really here. Creates many negatives that are experienced as you're working, some that show up later. That's an essential part of this article, some that show up later, and that's the thing that caught my attention. First off is the heat swells the paint. While it's minimal, it's a real effect. The heating of paint, and remember it's essentially plastic, can actually cause cuts or scratches to be driven further into the paint. The same heat softens the paint, reducing the effectiveness of the abrasives. Imagine sanding an ice cube versus sanding a marshmallow. So that rapid heating of the paint to the point where you're making it softer actually hinders the process of abrading or cutting that clear coat away. I think that's what Ivan's saying there. Right, the next section, which is important, and remember I'm paraphrasing here. Seen under the microscope, paint is like a sponge, and oil and solvents get pushed into the pores of the paint. Some often mistake this as polish having fillers. This oil injection combined with the swelling conspire to have the same effect as Botox on the skin, temporarily hiding wrinkles or in our case minor scratches. So that's really important. So you push, as you expand the structure of the paint, the matrix, that's the word that gets used often, you push the oils into the clear coat, which kind of like when you inject Botox into your lips, it kind of makes the lips, the skin on your lips seem flatter because it's all tighter, I guess is what they're saying here, which hides all the wrinkles on your skin. Next thing, this effect does not go away as soon as the paint cools down, so that's really important, very important. That injected oil / solvent mix stays in the matrix of the paint, keeping it swollen. Over time, it will work its way back out, returning the paint to its natural state. This can be as fast as a few days and up to many months. The injected oils are removed through erosion by water, emulsification by soaps and evaporation. Over the long term, this can cause paint failure. All too often we see paint failure as lines on the surface that look like a pass of a polisher made a few years back. Pad maintenance has a big effect on both their ability to cut but also generate heat. If your pad is loaded with product, compound or polish residue and paint residue or clear coat residue that you've shaved off from previous runs, the cut of the pad will be reduced and the heat and more heat will be generated. And then the article goes on to talk about pad choice and how that affects it, and sort of saying that wool actually, which has a bad reputation for buffer trowels, induces less heat than foam pads and microfiber pads. And I think microfiber will induce a little bit more pound for pound than a foam pad. So that is the Botox Effect article, and it was really interesting to me. I mean, I knew you can potentially heat up paintwork, or you do heat up paintwork as you polish it or compound it, you know, because you're doing it using abrasives, and that's always going to generate heat. I knew that heat wasn't going to help you with the cutting process. I did not know though that when you expand that clear coat, you pull all the oils into it and they stay in there. So that part was really interesting to me. And I did not know, following on from that it could take days or months for that effect, you know, for those oils and solvents to come out of the paintwork, if you like. And the key thing is that the damage that you inflict on the clear coat from stressing it like this, the buffers and the holograms, they can become more visible as this Botox effect disappears. And that is one of the most relevant things about this piece, and it's what I wanted to sort of have a play around with. At the end of the article it says, you know, do some testing yourself, it may change the way you correct paint. And I love that, because I know a lot of this is about forming your own opinion, and you can listen to what people say and then go and have a play around and see what you think. So a summary in layman's terms of what all of this article means, you know, in real terms to anyone doing this work. Now, first up, the Rotary Polisher, of course, is the machine where this becomes very relevant to, okay? So to heat up your paintwork to 140 to 150 degrees Celsius, you are typically going to need, I haven't tested this on the other machines, I'm going to at some point actually, crank all the machines up to full whack, use them with the biggest size pad that I will potentially use, put a lot of pressure on the edge, the highest bit of the furthest bit on the machine that's travelling the quickest, and try and stress that clear coat and see how high I can get the temperatures and see if I can get buffer trowels. Just off the top of my head, I do not think I'll be able to put buffer trowels into the paintwork with the free spinning, you know, dual action DAS 6 Pro Plus. Pretty sure I won't. I've used it enough times, you know, and I've played around with it enough times to know it just won't do that. You will stop the rotation if you're leaning in and stuff like that. That's one of the reasons those particular tools are great. I also think with my 3401, I will not be able to put buffer trowels in the paintwork. I have played around with that. If I'm on, it doesn't spin fast enough, even on top whack, that flex. But I'm guessing if you're going full whack with it, you can still raise the paintwork up and to probably close to 140 to 150, and probably work less efficiently, and that heat you put in actually destroys or dries out most lubrication systems in polishes very quickly and ruins your kind of set and hampers you. But I don't think I'll be able to put buffer trowels in with any other tool apart from a rotary. Now with rotaries, what is the real risk in layman's terms? Now, first thing I did just playing around with this is get myself a new test panel from the scrapyard. So I went down there with Reg to give me a hand to carry the bloody thing, and we found a decent, half decent, it took a long while, half decent panel from a Ford Cougar. I think it was a 2001. So it's a, you know, it's a 15, 16-year-old panel. So for a scrapyard panel, it's actually in decent shape, and Ford paint is usually somewhere in the middle. You know, it's not soft, it's not hard, it's decent enough. And the panel's obviously got nice, covered in micro scratches, in pretty poor shape. So it's ideal. The next thing I did is I got my rotary polisher, put a nice, I think it was a 150mm foam cutting pad on there, got myself an abrasive, cranked the machine up to 2500, which is beyond what most of the abrasive manufacturers advise you should be using, and just used the polish, you know, used the machine like an idiot, and just leaned in with quite a lot of pressure at very high speeds, and just did nice zigzagged. Achieved zero correction at all, because it just doesn't work. You literally destroy the abrasive in seconds and it dries right out and you're dry buffing, but you heat the paintwork out. And I heated this paintwork up to about 160 degrees. So it's just over the level that the article suggests you will overstress the clear coat, and you will start to install this kind of heat-induced marring or damage on the clear coat, otherwise known as buffer trails or holograms. The next thing I did after that was just have a play around with the rotary and see at what speed, using this same shoddy technique of really pressing, going very slow arm speed, but you know, really forcing the rotary into the paint with a lot of pressure, and you know, just polishing really poorly. What speed would get that temperature up very rapidly to 150 or beyond 150? And what I could find is that about 1000 RPMs, I could raise the temperature of that panel up to 150 rapidly enough where you can start to install buffer trails. Now, it's worth saying that the way I used the tool to do that was reckless, and you wouldn't normally do that, you know, leaning in and getting the outer edge sort of buried into the paintwork a little bit more. Normally you'd have your machine flatter, you'd be moving the arm a little bit quicker. So if you did that at 1000, I think you're at the point, I think you're at that tipping point at around 1000 where you need to be really careful. But the bottom line for me, and the reason I was playing around with this, is to kind of get an idea of where you don't want to be machine polishing. And it's quite simple really. It's the same as what I thought before I do the testing. You don't really want to be machine polishing at more than 1000 RPM. For me, for the methods that I'm using, with the abrasives that I'm using, if you start going above 1000 RPM, regardless of this hologram and buffer trowel and the Botox effect, that you are definitely generating heat. But what you typically do by generating that heat as well, a big downside to the heat, is you destroy the carrier or the lubrication system. You dry it out very quickly in your abrasives. And once you dry the lubrication system in your abrasives, you stop transporting the abrasives over the clear coat, and you will either be dry buffing, or if you heat the compound too rapidly, it kind of beds down into the paintwork. That's what I see. So for that reason, beyond buffer trails, you actually kind of ruin your set if you start trying to use it at high speeds. Okay, the next thing is looking at the buffer trails that were installed in the paintwork. So On the unrefined side, the buffer trails were visible under the workshop light and even more visible outside. One very important thing that the article doesn't delve into is that buffer trails can be very, I nearly swore then, very, very difficult to spot with workshop lighting, even some of the sort of best workshop lighting. You can spot the prolific ones with workshop lighting, but there are also buffer trails, you know, less prolific, I don't know if that's the right word, but smaller buffer trails, if you like, where you haven't really gone nuts with the speed, but you've got into that territory where you are installing them, and they are very difficult to spot. And unless literally you've got the panel outside in intense sunlight, which really shows up buffer trails better than anything. So that is a big issue with buffer trails, is that they can be very difficult to spot. So the side where we've done the compounding, the buffer trails are very, very visible even in the workshop light. The side where I'd refined the buffer trails, with the workshop light, I was struggling to see anything. We'd achieved zero correction, so I could see all the scratches, all the micro scratches still there, untouched, you know, but I couldn't see the buffer trails. When I got the paintwork outside in the light, I could see the buffer trails on the compounded side very, very clearly. They really start jumping out at you. But again, the buffer trails in the refined side, I couldn't see. There was just some very thin lines that I could see. So I knew something was there, but very difficult to spot. And it was only through being able to move the panel around against the sun that I could actually get that. If I was just wheeling a car out, I'd really struggle to see these buffer trails. About 9 or 10 days later, the buffer trails on the compounded side were looking even more kind of visible. What was like little lines before had come into bigger sections of it, and I could see the buffer trails shooting off in different directions, so they looked worse to me. But I could also see a little bit clearer, and there's not a lot in it, by the way, so this isn't scientific by any means. There is no real scientific means of looking at this as far as I know, or not that I've got anyway. But the side that I'd compounded in, I could see little thin, very tiny buffer trails that I was struggling to see before, and that's after about 9 or 10 days. So that's what I was looking for, to see if the Botox effect, as that panel sat outside there and cooled and some of those oils are eroded, you know, does that tie in with what Ivan's saying? And I think it does, although the difference was minimal. Perhaps if I leave the paint for another couple of weeks and I get a sunny day, they'll be even worse. Following on from this, the biggest things that I want you to take away from this video, and it's the thing that I'm really interested in your opinion of, is that one, buffer trails can be a nightmare to spot. So if you're doing them, you know, in full-on Rambo mode at 2,500 or above RPMs, and you're going really slow with lots of pressure, you probably put the more prolific ones in there that are easier to spot, and you'll be aware of them. That's the key thing. You spot them and you know you've done it, and you know you've got to fix them. But here's the thing. When you refine those buffer trails out, you know, you see you've put them in and you refine them out and the clear coat looks really good. That is where you've got to be very careful, because even under intense workshop kind of lighting, good lighting, whatever you're using, it can be very, very hard to spot buffer trails. And you could take them outside and it could be a cloudy day. There isn't enough sunshine to see them. Those sunny days where you've got real intense light, that is the best time to see buffer trails. But again, following on from that, even if you have refined them out and the lighting you're using is you can't see them in that lighting, or it's reasonably sunny and you can't see them, the problem with this Botox effect is that these buffer trails could potentially get worse as the Botox effect disappears. So I think, and you know, I've seen enough from just looking at that panel 9 days later and knowing that I've seen buffer trails kind of appear later on when I've been reckless with the Rotary. Yes, I have put buffer trails in cars. I think anyone that's used the Rotary a fair amount, yeah, well, they will have done. It's inevitable. So the key thing is to be aware of them. But the key thing is to understand as well from this video, and I'm really interested in people's opinion on this, is the fact, the danger, the red light, is that you can refine them out and they can potentially become more visible to the point where you can actually see them in normal light later on. So that is this video, guys. I'm really interested in your opinions on this one. I think a lot of professional detailers that are doing this day in and day out probably have moved away from rotaries, a lot of them, so that this doesn't become a problem and they can cut at a reasonably efficient rate, more consistent rate, perhaps get better results. and avoid this whole heating of paintwork problem. And they probably just do it, a lot of them, just because they've found they get better results with the dual action polishers. Now, I'm interested in anyone that still uses the Rotary Polisher as their main weapon of choice. Okay, God, that sounds a bit dorky, main weapon of choice. And in particular, any guys that use rotaries and do operate them at high speeds are aware that they are putting in buffer trails into the paintwork, but refine them out and are happy with kind of the way they're working, and have not seen this kind of phenomenon, perhaps of the Botox effect, of the paintwork contracting and the buffer trails coming back later on. I'm interested in your opinions on all this. It's a really healthy thing to talk about. It's a really interesting thing, but for me, need to be mindful of heat. What Ivan said about doing some testing on your own, I think, is a really important thing. It'd be great if some other guys could do that. What are the sort of speeds and temperatures that are your kind of trigger points? You know, you can get the infrared temperature gauges for not a lot of money, you know, probably less than £10 delivered. So you'll need one of those to do this if you're going to be doing this playing around. But other than that, guys, have a go. Let me know what you think on this whole subject, and I hope this video was useful to you. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you later.
待て待て。